I'll start by milling up the leg stock. The coffee table legs are only 2 1/4 inches thick compared to the 3 1/2 inch thick legs on a dining table. Each leg will be glued up from 2 pieces. After the glue is dry, the legs are squared up and planed to 2 1/4 square. Then I cut them to length at the table saw. Next, I'll mill up some stock for the rails. On the outside of the rail, we'll cut an accessory groove. First, I make a single curved groove to remove some material and lessen the stress on my T-slot bit. I can then plow the T-slot all the way across. Now I can lay out the taper. Remember, the 2 tapered faces are the ones that receive the joinery. The first taper is cut at the bandsaw. The cut is then taped back on and the second cut is made. I'll clean up the mill marks with a scraper, round over the edges, and sand. Notching the panel corners is just easier. I'll glue the 2 long rails to their respective legs to reduce the number of variables I have to deal with at this point. With a quick dry assembly, I can measure for the bottom panel and cut it out of a sheet of 3/4 inch plywood. To match my notched legs, I dog-ear the corners of my panel. If the dry fit looks good, you can proceed to the final glue-up of the base. As you can see here, I did the rest of my joints using the bandsaw method, which requires chisel cleanup after the fact. After finessing and fitting, the frame can be glued together. Not only do we want pressure in both directions to close up the shoulders, we also want to clamp each corner to bring the bridle joints together. With the top frame on the base, we can measure and cut the filler strips. We'll need 2 long strips and 2 short strips. The long strip is glued on first, flush with the inside edge of the frame, and extending about 1/8 of an inch on each side into the short rail area. The short filler strip is then cut to fit in the space between the long rails. When the glue dries, the frame should drop right into place. The router leaves rounded corners, so let's chop them square with a chisel. After the bulk is removed, can we go back and cut right on the line by chopping down. Once they're nice and snug, I'll take a few passes with my jack plane on each rabbeted edge of each board. This will hopefully provide enough slack for wood movement, considering the orientation of the grain is definitely not doing us any favors. Now we can glue the top in place. Just a bead of glue on the filler strips will do the trick. For the finish, I'll be using Osmo Polish. This is a hard wax oil that I wanted to experiment with. It's not quite as protective as something like a wipe and varnish, but it does a pretty decent job. I paint the finish on and then come back with either a paper towel or a white Scotch-Brite pad to buff it into the grain. Once dry, I'll sand the first coat with 320 grit and then apply a second coat the same way as the first.